Welcome to Ahead of the Game, a podcast brought to you by the Digital Marketing Institute. I'm Will Francis, and today I'm talking to Rebecca Robinson, a cybersecurity expert who runs Cybec Consulting and helps businesses drive better cybersecurity practice and ultimately innovate and grow through that. And so we'll be asking her all about how that applies to us in marketing. Today, Rebecca, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Nice to see you, meet you.
It's great to have you here. I don't think we've ever had a cybersecurity expert, certainly specifically like you here. So I've got so many questions to ask you because it is clearly more important than ever as a topic, isn't it? Cybersecurity. Where are we at with that? Like, what does that kind of mean in your work these days?
So, cybersecurity, absolutely a really, really important topic. It's something that we hear a lot about in the news, in the media. You hear about breaches, you hear about the impact that that's having on organizations. So, for financial impacts, for reputational damage. And it sounds scary. It sounds like a big, scary world out there. But the reality is that cybersecurity for me is about protecting things that keep your job and your organizations running, keeps them going, keeps it working, and keeps your customer basis and your reputational really positive. So it's about trust. But it's also about that resilience. So when things do perhaps go down, it's a way of making sure that you have a method of getting back up, getting running, making sure that the people aren't affected, that they can still go to work, that customers can still get the products or the services that they're wanting, and that fundamentally businesses don't lose income.
So it's not about having 100% record in terms of uptime and service time. Is it about just accepting the inevitability that things are going to go down and get, vulnerabilities be exposed?
I think the reality of when we're thinking about vulnerabilities, often we think about it from a breach that's happened because you have been attacked by a particular actor. But actually, many organizations exist on digital platforms. Their entire infrastructure is based on a digital platform that needs to keep running smoothly. And things can just go wrong. It doesn't necessarily have to be a breach. It could just be an error that happens that still means that you are going to lose time or potentially data, or the processes aren't running as you expect them to, which could then lead to the same kind of impact and consequences. So when we talk about inevitability of breaches or the inevitability of IT systems not working, yes, it probably is an inevitable thing, because that's just the way the world is, and we're very reliant on those systems. So we need to make sure that you've got the protections in place to kind of maintain those services and livelihoods, but actually to think about these things in a really positive way, because by having a secure basis, by having those really good foundations to make sure that you can continue to keep growing, you can continue to keep running, your organizations can grow as a result of that. You're able to keep on keep being secure, making sure that your products and services are available, and you can potentially also go into new areas and do new things that will help your revenue generation, your talent of people coming through, and keep that business pushing the boundaries of what is possible.
Yeah, because you can only do that when you're safe in the knowledge that you're not going to start breaking things and things are going to start falling apart when you grow and provide new services and features and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And most organizations are focused on perhaps keeping themselves safe without thinking about actually how you can embed security as a strategy to help you grow. And that's the bit that I guess I kind of focus on, is actually not just around trying to protect yourself from the online threats that exist, but actually having those kind of secure foundations, that basis of guess reassurance that actually your risk profile is such that you can go into this new sector, or launch this new product, or deliver your services in a different way, knowing that actually, yeah, when things go wrong, it's okay. It's not going to collapse the entire organization. We've still got the ability to keep functioning, keep growing, and protecting the things that keep your job and organization from stopping.
Yeah. So what kind of conversations do you tend to have with marketing people and teams in your work?
Yeah, so marketing's a really interesting space, isn't it? Because it's very creative. It's an industry that makes sure that you want to not stem the creative juices, and quite often in digital marketing that it's an intersect between those kind of digital aspects and the brand identity and that ability to communicate those ideas. And I guess all campaigns in these spaces, they really rely on, really good analytics, social accounts, the kind of email platforms and the ability to communicate with everybody. And I guess the area that gets impacted the most when it comes to reputational damage. So if something goes wrong a little bit in the digital marketing space, because the whole point is that outward voice, that's kind of sometimes where marketers need to manage their risks a little bit more around those spaces, because it can kind of easily get it can escalate that kind of
A very high
reputation.
profile
Yeah,
problem, can't it? Yeah.
it can be. So we talk a lot about making sure that they've got the ability to lock down all of these things. So if we're talking about the social media aspect, for example, making sure that all of those different platforms are locked down and protected as much as possible. So they've got the right steps in place so that people can't breach those platforms and post inappropriate content or messages that are not aligned to the organizations that they're working for. So it's just around those kind of things and making sure that they're confident in the technologies to be able to actually use these platforms in a really successful way without worrying about any unintentional issues.
And I suppose, look, the marketing team of people are the people who are keeping a lot of customer data, personal data like addresses, email addresses, names, buying patterns, all kinds of things that we've got on file. So I suppose that's possibly our biggest vulnerability as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So those kind of data storage systems, who accesses it, why they're accessing it, when they're accessing it, those things all need to be kind of understood. And the user account access points those permissions need to be granted to the people who need them and not anybody else. So that you've really got that overarching strategy as to who is able to get those permissions, who is able to access those services, who is able to then perhaps take that data and use it in a different way. And we just need to be really aware of that.
We get so lax about it. Look, I've been guilty of it, and I've been in teams that have been guilty of it, where passwords never get changed, passwords get sent around on Slack and email. This is passwords to platforms like MailChimp, where we've got everyone's details, or to the account's Instagram profile and stuff like that. And I think it's so easy to forget that this stuff is just swimming around, unencrypted. So I think, look, I have to admit that I've seen it, and I've been guilty of maybe being a bit lax. So is it often just like simple change your passwords, review who's got access stuff, really, isn't it?
For those things, it's a really simple, absolutely simple tools that are user friendly, so the end users are able to implement. The reason that you're probably sharing passwords is because you all need access to that data. You're all having to have access to it. So find a solution that works for you, and that can be multiple levels of security. So we're talking about multiple passwords to get into various different accounts. It could be different account profiles. It's just about procedural changes that make a really big difference, because as you can imagine, somebody with that shared password could easily get onto the system, could easily get access to all of those emails. They could then easily send out inappropriate content, or it's a perfect phishing tool. So for somebody who wants to send out a phishing email, that's such an easy way of doing it. You've got an entire chain of people who would be interested in receiving messages from these people, and so therefore they're going to open it. So you've got to just be careful around how you share that information, and and making sure that you don't share unnecessary information.
Well, I suppose, it's like we often hear that people are the weakest link in cybersecurity. It's not the systems, it's the people, isn't it? Do you agree with that?
I really don't like the phrase "people are the weakest link." Um, it's it's because that puts a blame on the individuals, that it's their fault that they've been breached, that it's their fault that something has happened. And you know, most cyber incidents aren't necessarily caused by people who have done something carelessly. It's usually done
Mm,
because it's an unclear system, poor
mm,
processes, or unrealistic expectations on individuals when they are time pressured. They have got, a bunch of different competing priorities. And so I don't like it when we say that people are the weakest link. In my opinion, I think we should flip that, and I think we should see them as the first line of the defense. I think we should start to kind of actually embed people into
mm,
good system design that actually supports the human behavior. So cyber risk is around the technologies, of course, but it's absolutely about the human behavior. And there's no point fighting this, because fundamentally that won't work. You're just going to get
mm,
workarounds like you've just described, sharing of passwords.
mm.
And I think that really good cybersecurity strategy should assume that people are busy, that we're all human, we're all fallible, but that we build protections around those realities.
Yes, I get that. You're right. It's about process. It's surely about training, isn't it?
It is absolutely about training. And cybersecurity training is often seen as a tick box exercise.
Mm,
It is something that people, and I have witnessed it many times, where
mm,
people have got cybersecurity training on and they're doing something else as well. So on one screen, they're apparently doing some training, and on the other screen, they're doing their day job. And they get to the bottom of this training, and they have a bunch of different questions with multiple options. And most of say there's three multiple options, two of them are really obviously not the right answer, and the third one is obviously it. They tick it, they get through that process, they passed with 80% or whatever, which is the kind of standard pass rate, and they
mm.
think that they are now cyber secure. That
Right.
is not, in my opinion, very good training. It doesn't
Mm,
change behavior. It doesn't actually take into account people's roles, what they actually do on a day-to-day basis. And those training models are seen as an annoying thing that people have to do, and not something that actually is appropriate or relevant to their work and what they're doing. So we need
yeah.
to have better training in cybersecurity. It needs to be relevant to the people within their roles and what they're doing. And then
Mm,
they need to understand the importance of it, and actually where the issues come from, and actually how some of these digital failures, whether that's a breach or, a way that somebody has approached something and done it wrong, they those kind of digital failures affect real lives. They actually impact on us as individuals, as employees, as well as
mm,
the employers. It does affect us as well. And that we need to kind of help people through that, because it is a really
yeah.
horrible moment. The amount of people I've spoken to who have
Mm,
accidentally clicked on a phishing link, or
mm,
something's happened, they've done something, and then they feel that guilt, blame.
yeah.
I shouldn't have done that. That was my fault. And they sit, and it
Yeah.
sits with them, but it's not an individual's fault. It means that the structures, the processes, the training that they've had probably wasn't appropriate.
Yeah, I mean that's something that's well documented, isn't it? That victims of scams and cyber attacks, that this is a financial cost, the financial harm is also real psychological harm, because people feel
Yeah.
so stupid and guilty,
Yeah.
um, and really
Embarrassed.
awful about it.
Yeah, they do. And it sits really hard with individuals thinking that they've done something wrong.
Yeah,
And they feel embarrassed. Many
yeah,
people I've spoken to, I speak to a lot of people who have had cyber breaches,
mm,
and that's just because of the job that I do. But
Mm.
actually, those individuals, they feel that pressure. They don't want to talk about it. They worry about what that
Yeah.
means in terms of their own personal, professional reputation, as well as the
Yeah.
organization's reputation and how that sits. And the reality
Mm.
is that we're all fallible, and actually the breaches that are happening are getting more and more sophisticated. It's hard to tell an
Yeah.
email that has been sent from a hacker. That
Yeah.
is so hard to tell apart from one that looks like it could be from your CEO. If you don't
Yeah.
know those individuals very well, the language could sound very similar.
Yeah.
The way that the actual email is structured could sound really similar. It can sound like something that they might ask of you. And so it's
Mm.
really hard to tell. And so we shouldn't feel the blame. The way that the process is working now is that they are becoming much more sophisticated, much more
Mm.
credible, I suppose, look much more credible. And so therefore people are falling for them left, right and centre, but it's not their fault. They are victims of
Yeah.
fraud in those moments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, some people, I hear about some hackers getting more targeted because some people are more vulnerable than others. I don't know. Have you heard about whaling or whale phishing?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's exactly it. So these are people who are they're impersonating senior figures within your organizations or
Mm.
senior um, uh, um, people from out in the
Mm.
community to kind of try and get people to do things. So a CFO sending an email to
Yeah.
their accounts team asking them to pay an invoice with urgency is usually in there. So that sense of pressure is kind of built into these emails. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to get
Yeah.
the individuals to feel that pressure, to feel the importance of it by putting somebody of a very senior figure into these
Yeah.
emails, and that's how they get them to quickly click a link or quickly send a pay an invoice, or whatever it might
Yeah.
be.
Well, it works the other way as well, doesn't it? The side of it is that it can be singling out sort of high-ranking
Yeah,
executives, people with a lot of high-level access to systems, and really trying to just hack or phish that one person. Because if we get access to their stuff, we've got access to basically everything. And I suppose in all these things, there's a massive component of social engineering, isn't there? That's a lot of what hacking is about. It's not just being able to code up an email that looks like it was from your bank. It's partly about the social engineering, the trickery, the
absolutely.
con artistry of it.
Yeah, so social engineering is a really interesting concept. It's basically based on understanding human behavior, trying to use us and our way of believing and trusting, and
Mm.
wanting to be kind and generous and all these other really good qualities that vast majority of people have got. The classic one in a building would be to hold a door open for somebody.
Yeah.
It's a secure door, but you hold it open because you're being polite, you're being kind,
Mm.
and you think that's the nice thing to do, when the reality is you should allow that door to shut behind you and let the person to swipe card entry into the building or whatever it might be. um, and it's very, very easy to do those types of things. There was a study that was done just post-pandemic, and obviously during the pandemic, many people left their normal place of work, and there was a study
Yeah.
that was done in London. Some people stood outside the building with high-vis vests on and a lanyard, which actually I think said something like "I am a fraudster" around their neck. And they tried to gain access to a secure building. Within, I think it's 5 minutes of them being outside this building, they managed to gain entry because the security guards saw that they were stood outside, apparently surveying people that were coming into the building. And within that 5 minutes, they'd managed to get inside because it'd been raining. The security guard felt sorry for them and said, "Why don't you just come and stand in the lobby? You don't need to stand outside." Well, of course, they're physically then beyond that first breach. They've gone
Yeah.
through that first barrier, they've breached that first barrier. I
Mm.
think within about 20 minutes, they were able to prove that they'd been able to get into not only the building, but into the actual offices, which had
Yeah.
access control lifts. They'd managed to actually get into the CFO's office itself, and they could have accessed any systems that they wanted to. But the point is, everything that they did wasn't using technology; it was just using words. They were able just to talk their way in. They were able just to use
Yeah.
people's generosity and kindness and trust,
Oh,
and
yeah.
just kind of breach those barriers systematically. So that can happen in a very physical way, but it can also happen on a social media type way. We share
Yep.
a huge amount of information online. And so those individuals who are using whaling as a technique, what they're doing is they're finding a bunch of information around those people. So,
Yes.
your CEO is really into football or really into
Yeah.
cricket or whatever it might be, has an interest in something, and they use that information to be able to create a better understanding of what type of language they may use, how they may communicate,
Yeah.
what significant dates are for them, where are they, so that they can embed all of that information into an email to send to somebody else to kind of do that next level of breach, or just to
Yeah.
give them, I guess, the credibility in those emails or however they're going to communicate, to make it look like they are that person. So if they know that
Yep.
they're abroad at that moment, they'll embed that in that message. They'll, if they know that they're traveling for work in this place because it's all over socials, they'll use it
That's
all.
true. Yeah, that's a very good point, that, isn't it? I think some people refer to it as open source intelligence, this idea of like pre-research. And like you say, if you know the CEO coaches his kids' cricket team, you could ring up his receptionist and say, "Hi, I'm one of the dads from the cricket team in Chalfont St. Peter, and I just quickly need to get some, and you can create this instant kind of trustability. And but also what I'm quite interested in this kind of stuff, and I've noticed that urgency is also a big part of it.
Yeah.
You can get people to lower their barrier a bit by creating urgency and like, oh, we really need it now, or kind of
Yeah.
thing. Do you see any of that?
Oh, 100%. Everything is done with urgency. That is
Mm.
exactly it. You put the people under the pressure to make a quick decision. And the
Yes.
reason you do that is because they don't have thinking time. And one of the key messages that we always put out there is take 5. Literally
Ah,
just take 5.
yeah.
Just stop, count, and think, and just actually think to yourself, why am I being put under this level of, this is unusual, this wouldn't
Mm.
normally happen, or actually, would this be the process that they'd follow even under this level of pressure? For whatever reason, that bill needs to be paid, or this needs to be transferred here, or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
they need that password urgently. Well, is this the normal route that they would ask for that information, or ask for that to be paid? And I think by just pausing, just take 5, you will actually start to think, actually, that might not be the way they would normally ask for this, or that might not be the way that they would go about trying to solve that problem. So
Yeah.
by doing that, you're just slowing it down a little bit, giving yourself the headspace. Ask somebody else, communicate to somebody else, so and so and so and so just sent me this email. Do you think that is
Yes.
the way that they would ask for that? And just by doing that, you're just slowing the whole thing down. Those few minutes are not going to make a difference, even if it is an urgent request. They're not going to make a difference
Yeah.
significantly to whatever that process is that they're trying to get out of you. And urgency is something that, when we're under pressure, when we're trying to
Yeah.
do other things, by putting that sense of urgency in there, it can just make us make mistakes. There's a
Yes.
very there's a clip that an American company have used to try and get us to understand a little bit more around that urgency, and it's somebody who does it's basically, it's phishing, it's called, so it's video or voice elicitation,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they try to use that as a method of showing what happens and how you can put somebody under urgency. And this very talented woman rings up a mobile phone provider, network provider,
Yeah.
and in the background she's just got YouTube on with a crying baby. and this crying baby is obviously creating a sense of urgency.
Brilliant.
It's not, they're not saying this is an urgent matter, but it's putting a pressure on
Yeah.
the person who's answered the call, because
Yeah.
throughout it she's going, shh, it's okay, you know, it's okay, I'll be with you in a minute, I know you want your bottle, I'm just trying to get the password for daddy's phone account, I'll be just a minute, you know. And all these
Yeah.
things are being said, and it's just getting the other person at the other end of the phone to feel some level of pressure to help to
Yeah.
resolve quickly.
Yeah.
And within only a few minutes, she has indeed managed to breach the interviewers. It's actually the interviewers' phone company that are trying to get into. She's managed to breach it. She's managed to change the password for his account to his mobile network. She's
Yeah.
managed to redirect his calls to her phone. And it all happened purely by saying, oh, I'm really sorry. Oh, he asked me to do this. He asked me, you know, and with a fake crying baby in the background.
That's genius. She sounds like someone who might compete at DEF CON. So every year there's a hacker convention called DEF CON in the States, and they have a social engineering competition, and people are given a certain amount of time to compromise a real call center operative, and they're on stage doing it, and it's exactly that kind of stuff that they do, and I find it fascinating.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It's so good. Yeah, she'd be good
But
at that.
yeah, and it really opens your eyes to how fallible these systems and processes are. So I think you're right. I think urgency is a red flag, and also I've heard that advice before about ask someone else, because not only do you get a second opinion and someone can look at it cold and be like, this might be a scam, but also you're right. You slow things down, don't you? You create
Yeah.
that friction, and keep the barriers that should be in place there. Without sort of rushing towards something silly. So, okay, so thinking about how this sort of applies in your, how this stuff applies in your work. I mean, I'm curious, just want to roll back a little bit. I mean, how did you first get interested in cybersecurity? Like, what was the trigger for you to think this is a career for me?
A really interesting question, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster, I'll be honest. I
Mm.
didn't go into cybersecurity straight out of education. That wasn't where I was heading necessarily. I
Mm.
actually did a medical electronics PhD. So I built a
Wow,
brain imaging device for my PhD.
cool.
I was really interested in the interface between kind of, I guess, human physiology and technology, and how technology can aid, in that case, healthcare and diagnosis and
Mm.
and interventions. So I was really, really interested in that. So that's kind of where I sort of started. My PhD was at Manchester University, and I realised quite quickly that lots of health tech were going down the route of embedding, and we were starting to make them IoT, so Internet of Things. They're
Yeah.
connected to the internet, enabling remote clinical teams to be able to observe what's happening with that individual. So in the healthcare setting, that was starting to happen quite frequently, and the huge benefits for that, being able to help to remote monitor somebody who has a heart condition, for example,
Yeah.
and being able to identify perhaps where certain things, incidents could happen, and prevent, obviously, anything happening in
Mm.
the future. So those things were happening, but I realized quite quickly that this was actually these are connected devices on people with people's data, and that is really complicated. Lots of complicated aspects to that in terms of thinking about the security. You have
Yeah.
personal data, you have the data being kind of having to be remotely transferred, understood, and then interventions changed. So I kind of got really interested in all that. I actually then moved into kind of large scale program delivery when I went in. I relocated and decided that I was really interested in kind of how these programs could impact businesses more generally. So I was speaking to lots of organizations who relied on digital tools, but they didn't understand the risks.
Mm.
They didn't understand how their reliance on the IT platforms that they got were actually absolutely going to benefit their organizations long term, but they didn't understand the risks that also inherently came with relying on technology. And so I got a lot more interested in the behavior and people's approaches to cybersecurity, and less interested in the technology, I guess, as I kind of moved along. But that kind of human dimension has always kept me really engaged, kind of thinking of whether that was a healthcare application or whether that's trying to make sure that people feel empowered within organizations to make decisions. It's always been the human dimension that's kept me engaged in any technology-based job I've had.
That's interesting. So you working on sort of brain computer interface nearly 20 years ago, and now I think today we've got Neuralink, which has kind of achieved that, right? And that's really interesting that you were kind of very in very probably in a very early way working on that. It's fascinating. But you're absolutely right. It's a logical next thought to be like, what if someone hacks this? That's not good.
Exactly. And what does that mean? And to be clear, for anyone listening, I'm not trying to suggest that the hackers would be able to manipulate us or make us do different things. I mean, we're not all being turned into robots. No, don't need to worry about that. But it's more about data manipulation. And so what happens if the data that the clinicians are looking at is incorrect, is wrong? What does that mean for you? Does that mean an unnecessary surgical procedure? Does that mean medications that you shouldn't be taking? These are the things that we need to be aware of, really, when it comes to medical technologies impacting on the future. Because if they're making decisions around these things, they need to make sure that that data is the correct and accurate data for you. And historically, the kind of health sector hasn't been necessarily attacked that frequently. Here in the UK, for example, it was I guess a little bit of an unwritten rule that health sector wasn't targeted by hackers. But actually in 2017 we had the WannaCry attack that happened. It completely changed the way that the law here in the UK is when it comes to
just quickly explain that for listeners who didn't see the news about the WannaCry attack on the NHS.
So it was a really big global breach. It wasn't just on the NHS. It was a global breach that happened in 2017. And they exploited the vulnerabilities within one of Windows operating systems. And at the time, the NHS had quite a lot of Windows XP machines, and it exploited a vulnerability within that particular operating system. And it meant that ransomware was held on all of these machines, so you can no longer access anything. So ransomware literally takes control of your entire machine, usually has a little message that pops up telling you what to do, the instructions of what to do, and often are there for financial gain. So they want you to pay to be able to unlock all your devices. This was the first time a breach had happened of that scale in the NHS, and its impact was huge. We're talking thousands of operations had to be cancelled, thousands of routine appointments had to be cancelled, many people impacted as a result of this. And there was a real worry that it was a risk to life. This was a genuine risk to life. So what happens in these situations and what are the consequences? And here in the UK at the time, we didn't really have any laws that would actually enable prosecution to happen, to take somebody, Computer Misuse Act was there, but it wasn't strong enough to be able to convict something that would potentially kill somebody. It didn't, the law wasn't sufficient enough. So it changed the law here in the UK. But the actual attack itself, with the long tail of that attack was for years. We think about cyber breaches as a kind of immediate hit and what that means for that organization, but the consequences, it's a long tail of consequences, and that can last months if not years. And it did within the NHS. It lasted years, and that meant they were individuals who didn't have appointments for a really long time. Potentially those surgery never happened. And I'm sure there has been many personal stories of healthcare consequences as a result of that breach.
Yeah, I think that was a very big wake-up call. It was a really big news story here in the UK, and globally. And it was a big wake-up call, wasn't it? Just how vulnerable our systems are. And so I think, yes, we've, but even now, I mean, we started to take cybersecurity slowly more seriously. But what do you think are the big differences? How have the threats changed? If you could very just briefly map out. I mean, because you talk about phishing, that's been around for as long as I've been on the internet, I think. But how have the threats in general changed over the time you've been working in cybersecurity?
Well, phishing is without the doubt the most prolific aspect.
Ah,
It continues to be.
right.
Phishing globally is the absolute thing that everybody, I'm sure, has come across, everybody
Mm,
has probably seen, and it's certainly the most prolific. Continues to be. The
mm,
difference in terms of how phishing kind of started and where we are now, it's radically more sophisticated.
yeah, exactly.
Quite often, historically, it would be quite clumsy in terms of the wording behind it, but also there'd be really
Mm,
obvious intent. It would be obvious that the email was attempting to extract some financials from you. That's
yeah,
fundamentally, it was asking you almost to pay. Not quite,
yeah.
but pretty much. And now it's much more sophisticated. It's much more subtle. It is using, as we've already described, other methods of making sure that that email looks like it could be constructed from somebody somebody trusted, and has a lot more detail in it that will make you click a link. So phishing itself has had a real big evolution
Yeah.
over a short period of time. But there are many other breaches now that happen. Ransomware is one that we just mentioned before, where your entire
Mm,
systems are held. But there's other lots of different other attacks that can happen, and there are sort of system failures that can also happen. So, for example,
mm,
overwhelming servers is something that people do. So this is a way of actually using either multiple different devices
yeah.
to overwhelm a website, to slow a websites down so that trading has to stop. They cannot function if they're obviously an e-commerce website or something like that. By intentionally targeting that, it will stop it from functioning or slow it down significantly, that you can't trade
Yeah.
anymore. So
Yeah.
those types of things are happening, and they used to take a huge amount of energy and power to be able to do it, and
Yeah.
now they don't. You can easily get what we call a botnet together. An
Mhm.
individual can be the person coordinating it all, and it's a few kind of clicks of a button and they're instantly able to overwhelm small servers and things like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the resilience now needs to come on backups and how you're actually, what do your providers actually do? How do they ensure that those things can't happen? So usually talking about multiple servers,
Yeah.
multiple processes to keep everything up and running. And of course, that whole overwhelming of a server can happen accidentally when you have
Yes.
some sort of Taylor Swift or whoever releases her
Yeah.
next
Viral
tour.
moment.
Moments happen, and we've all probably
Mm.
been sat there. Um, I know I was sat there trying to get Oasis tickets not that long ago, and was very unsuccessful, sadly. But trying to click and get tickets in, on the concerts, etc. So those kind of things happen accidentally as
Well,
well.
those denial of service, those DDoS
That's
denial
right.
of
That's what it's
service
called.
attacks you're
Yeah.
talking about there, can we rely on things like Cloudflare, which acts as an intermediary between our web servers and the world? Are they effective?
Yeah, absolutely. They are effective. And again,
Mm.
you need to understand, I guess, how they're implemented and what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. The thing is, these breaches that we've just been talking about, there are always solutions as to how to kind of overcome, or at least be aware of them. So, right
Yeah.
the way from the phishing aspects all the way up to, DDoS attacks, for example. There are
Mm.
lots of different ways and methods of being able to make sure that you can be more secure. But I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning, which is that
Mm.
we need to make sure that this is usable for people, that actually the
Yeah.
protections are in place, that that aren't then worked around by people. So, we've got to make sure that people aren't trying to find another way around it who are actually in the organization. So
You
everything
mean
needs to
because we
work.
put up more friction, and
Yeah.
basically people don't want to do it that way. They'll do it the
Yeah.
easy but insecure way.
That's right, because we've probably
Hmm.
all been there when we've tried to log on to something and then it says, "Oh, you need to get your unique ID," and you're waiting for the
Yeah,
text message to come through, and
yeah,
you're irritated because all you want to do is log on and do whatever it is you're trying to do, and everybody gets frustrated in those moments. So the systems do definitely need to be designed to support our behavior, and make sure that we don't fight it. And as I said before, good cybersecurity assumes that people are busy, that they are fallible, that we are all human, but it's building the protections around those. So yeah,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
lots of ways of doing that.
When your clients, so at Cybec, your consultancy, when you get new business requests, what is it that triggers? Because I mean, obviously, if they're coming to you and they've been hacked, it's probably a bit late. So, at what point are they coming to you, and why, and what are they asking for?
So I'll be honest, quite a lot of them come after they've been hacked, and it does feel a
Okay, yeah, right,
little bit like, the horse has already bolted. But
yeah,
the reality is that actually, it's never too late to be more secure, right? So, and it's
right,
never too late to start the training. What I tend to do is I tend to work with people who are in risk management roles or governance roles, kind of policy compliance people, as well as the kind of technical side of the teams. And I try to help them to understand where some of the kind of friction points are. So
mm,
from a usability perspective, but also trying to get them to actually be more effective with their cybersecurity training, policies, governance structures, so that actually it works the best for the tech teams, for the end users, and for the decision makers. So it has to be a very collaborative process, and that's what I try to do. Very, very collaborative, fast paced, but
yeah.
people focused.
And how does it differ between small businesses and really big businesses? Or are we all kind of basically using the same systems and prone to the same kind of issues?
I mean, I would say that absolutely everybody is, the risk profile fundamentally all looks pretty similar. I
Yeah.
think one of the things that small businesses often think, or as individuals often think, is, well, what will the hackers be interested in me for? I'm so small, I've got nothing of interest, so it's not for me. And they assume that because they're small, that they're not going to get a breach. But actually, the reality is many of our kind of attacks that happen is a case of casting the net out wide and just seeing what sticks. That's what they do. And so if you are, if you do
Mm,
have those vulnerabilities, if you do have very open platforms, if you are easy, they're going to attack you too, because fundamentally everybody has something that's worth something. So that's
yeah.
data, that's finances, that's ideas and IP. We all have something of a value, whether that's
Yeah.
to us as individuals or as an organization. So, um, no, we all have the same kind of challenges, from individuals right the way up to large organizations. The difference is around, I guess, the governance and the risk management of this. But most of what I try to do is a bottom-up approach to
Mm,
cybersecurity training rather than a top-down approach. Nobody particularly enjoys being
yeah.
told what to do by leadership if it feels like it's against the grain.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, and I agree with that, it's got to be focused on the individuals. And so understanding how we actually behave within our roles and within our organization is really important to make sure that the training is more appropriate, it's tailored, and it actually means that it gets embedded in the culture of the organization rather than a bolt on and the, tick box exercise.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's funny because today a lot of us blur our work and personal life. I've noticed that a lot more work stuff comes through WhatsApp these days. I've kind of given into that myself, and I think a lot of people have. And so I feel like that might present a bit of a risk. Your employees are going around with devices that they're doing personal and work stuff on, sometimes in the same app. How do we deal with that?
This is why I think it needs to be a bottom-up approach to training, because
Yeah,
if you were to look at that from a top-down structure, you would instantly go, well, that's not allowed. So you're going to need a totally separate phone. You're going to need to do
yeah,
everything very isolated. But the reality is that isn't how we're working, and you're absolutely right. And lots of people are using different applications for both personal and professional.
yeah.
And I don't really see anything wrong with that if it's helping you to become more efficient and effective in your workplace. That's a good thing,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
But you just need to make sure that you're doing it in a secure way. So you just always need to be sure of what you're sharing. So when we're talking about doing, for example, online conferences and things like that, so video calls,
Mm,
it wasn't that long ago that video calls were really unusual.
yeah.
We didn't do them pre-lockdown or pre-pandemic. When did that ever
Mm,
happen?
mm,
Whereas now the world has changed, where many people work remotely, many people are working online, many people, as you say, are using different apps and devices for both home and work. And we just need to be clear on if we as an individual are secure in our processes, and we use really good I'm going to say good cyber hygiene, then actually that probably is something that will transfer across into our professional world anyway. So,
mm,
if people are using password managers for personal, they're more likely to use password managers for professional. If you're using
yeah.
multi-factor authentication for personal applications, you're going to use it for work applications and vice versa. So making sure that all of your devices or your applications and things like that are all up to date,
Yeah.
that you have got these good cyber hygiene processes in place. You try to separate out your work and personal accounts where possible. And then just be cautious about what you're sharing within a platform where you are doing both. You don't
Mm,
need to have a detailed conversation with your accountant via WhatsApp, for example, or whatever it might be. Just be mindful of it. And I
yeah.
suppose those habits will eventually reduce your risks everywhere within your workplace, but also within your home life.
Well, that's true. These are good skills to teach people that will extend through their, beyond their work life, right, and into their
Yeah.
personal life, and have them develop better habits. I think more safe habits. Um, right. That's really interesting. Okay, so what do you think are the biggest myths and misconceptions that people have that you encounter about cybersecurity?
Um, I think most people think that cybersecurity isn't something that they need to think about. That happens quite a lot. They assume it's a very technical world, and therefore, if they're not a technical person, cybersecurity is nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
I think that most businesses that I speak to think that they can effectively outsource that risk. So I have an
Uh,
outsourced IT department, therefore, surely that risk isn't mine anymore. The
yeah.
reality is the risk always sits with us as individuals in our personal life and individuals within our professional life. That is just the very nature of what we're doing, right? So that risk does sit with you. You cannot outsource your risk. Um,
Mm.
I think lots of people assume that we are working in a world where everything has to be super locked down, everything has to be
Yeah.
100% secure. And the reality with cybersecurity, it isn't about perfection necessarily. It's about reducing the risk to the point where you are not an easy win for hackers. You are your threshold is such that you can still continue to be creative, to do the work that you want to do, to enable the next steps within your organization. But
Mm.
actually, it's secure enough that you're not an easy win.
Yes, you're right. I think, like we said at the beginning, that perfection isn't what it's about, is it? It's about preparedness and about resilience, ultimately.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Interesting, right? Okay. Well, look, our time is nearing an end, But I really must, before you go, ask you if you could get every listener to change just three behaviors or implement three things in their life after this episode to make themselves and their organization safer, what would they be?
Um, I would first of all get everybody to slow down in the moment of feeling like something urgent has just come through. So whether that's the phishing email, whether it's the fake sharing of files or
Yeah.
compromise accounts, whatever, just take 5, think, ask somebody. That would be my first top tip. The second one for organizations would be to think about your IT systems and processes like you would currency. So only give
Mm.
tools and agencies and colleagues the access that they actually need. Only give them the currency that they actually need to be able to perform the role or whatever it might be that they have to have. So, those shared logins are really big risks, and the shared passwords are really big risks. So treat it like currency, only give those people who need access to the tools access. So that'll be my second tip. And then I would say for my third tip is make sure that you have got really strong individual passwords. So do not use the same password for every account that you have. Make sure that you aren't using something that's connected to you. Don't use your pet's name plus a couple of numbers and then an exclamation mark.
Oops.
Do try, yes, please change yours now. Please use something random. So if you could use 3 random words and a numbers and characters that you wouldn't ordinarily use. Make sure they're not linked to you personally. We talked about the fact that these social engineering can happen and it can link to the various things. So not your favorite football team, not your favorite sports player, not your favorite child, whatever. Do make sure that you use something completely not relevant. And if you can, use password managers. They're not scary. They're good. They work. And so use a password manager.
Do you mean the built-in one within something like Chrome or Safari, or do you mean things like LastPass and those more sort of standalone?
Do you know, actually, you can use either. They're better than you having a password that's 1234566. So at the moment that we're at a space where actually, if you can use a password manager, use one. The standalone ones are better. But I appreciate that sometimes there are charges involved, and sometimes it can become difficult for people to use password managers in certain sectors and things. So, don't necessarily rely on password managers. You can create your own system. One of the top tips that I was given a long time ago is to create your own phonetic alphabet. So just create your own random phonetic alphabet, and at that point you can start to use 3 random words for those that link to whatever account it is that you've got. And if you do that, it'll be an easy way for you to remember it, and it'll be something that will be quite difficult to get.
Oh, I like that. That's an interesting idea. I also like the fact that Safari, if you store your passwords in that, it will notify you if those passwords have been found in a leak.
That's it.
And I believe they get the information from haveibeenpwned.com, which is
That's right.
the words have I been owned, but the O is a P.
Yes.
.com, and you could just go straight to that website, can't you? I think you just put your email address in, and it just tells you anytime your email address or username shows up in one of the latest breaches that's sort of appeared or been traded somewhere online.
Yeah, that's it. And it's a really good tool actually to do that. But it's good cyber hygiene. You change your passwords regularly anyway. So it shouldn't be an issue if there has been a breach, because you should, of course, be changing your password frequently.
Yes, indeed. That's good advice. Sound advice. Look, I feel like I've taken plenty of your time, learned so much. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Rebecca, it's really interesting topic to talk about, and I'm sure an interesting one to listen to. Before you go, just tell people where they can find and connect with you online.
Of course. So my company is called Cybec Consulting Limited. I am on LinkedIn, and my website is www.cybec, which is cybec.co.uk.
Great, we'll check it out. Well, thanks again and hope to chat to you again soon, Rebecca.
Thank you very much.